What if the very people sworn to uphold justice were the ones who abused it? And what if one man, caught in their web of corruption, turned out to be the key to their downfall? Judge Marcus Reed's day began like any other, a respected figure on his way to serve his community. But when two overzealous officers wrongly arrest him, their actions trigger a chain of events that will shake the foundation of Ashwood City. What starts as an act of racial profiling unravels into a web of corruption, lies, and betrayal involving powerful figures who thought they were untouchable. As the evidence mounts, Marcus, a fearless journalist, a determined federal marshal, and an unlikely ally, must race against time to expose a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of power. Lives are at stake, trust is broken, and danger lurks at every turn. Who can be trusted in a system built to protect the corrupt? And when the dust settles, will justice truly prevail? The sun was high over the city of Ashwood, its golden light shimmering against the glass windows of City Hall. The streets buzzed with life vendors calling out their morning specials, coffee shops filled with locals, and business professionals moving with purpose. Officer Miles Hendricks leaned against his patrol car, adjusting his sunglasses as he scanned the crowd. His partner, Officer John Carson, stood nearby, sipping from a disposable cup. "Another day, another case," Hendricks muttered. Carson smirked. "You're right. Let's see if anyone stands out." That's when they noticed him, a tall black man in a tailored suit stepping out of a sleek black sedan. His demeanor exuded confidence. The suit fit like it was custom-made, and his polished leather shoes glimmered as he walked toward the grand steps of City Hall. In his hand was a weathered leather briefcase, worn from years of use. "Look at that," Hendricks muttered. "Who drives a car like that and parks here at this hour? Looks too polished to be local." Carson's eyes narrowed. "Let's check him out." They approached quickly, their boots tapping against the pavement. The man noticed them coming but didn't break his stride. "Sir, hold it right there," Hendricks called out, placing his hand near his holstered weapon, a move meant to assert authority. But it wasn't necessary. The man turned calmly, his expression steady. "Is there something I can help you with, officers?" His voice was calm, measured, and professional. "We've had reports of a vehicle matching yours involved in suspicious activity," Carson lied smoothly. The man arched an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Suspicious activity? That's a serious claim. May I see the report?" The request was simple, but made Carson bristle. Hendricks stepped closer, his tone shifting. "Hands where I can see them," he ordered. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice." There was a collective hush from the bystanders who had begun gathering. Phones emerged from pockets, their cameras recording every word and gesture. The man's composure never wavered. Slowly, he raised his hands. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. Hendricks grabbed his arm, locking one cuff around his wrist. "We'll see about that," he sneered, as the second cuff snapped into place. Carson chuckled. "Big shot, huh? Let's see how tough you are in a holding cell." The crowd watched, horrified, as the man was escorted to the patrol car. He didn't resist. He simply walked with his head held high, staring straight ahead. Inside the precinct, the man sat calmly in the holding cell, his cuffed hands resting in his lap. His composure infuriated Hendricks and Carson, who loitered nearby. "Think he's too good for us," Carson muttered. "Look at him, silent as a saint." Hendricks sneered. "It's the quiet ones who think they're above the law." Minutes passed. The man finally broke his silence, looking toward the sergeant at the front desk. "I need to make a phone call," he said simply. The sergeant, a stocky man named Owens, leaned back in his chair with a smug smile. "Oh yeah? What for?" The man met his gaze without blinking. "I have court tomorrow." Owens raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You planning to defend yourself?" The man stood slowly, straightening his posture. "No," he replied. "I am the judge." The room fell silent. The officers stared, confusion turning to disbelief. Owens fumbled with his keyboard, typing the man's name into the system. When the results appeared, his face paled. Marcus Reed, Justice of the Peace. The realization hit them like a freight train. They hadn't just arrested anyone, they had arrested the judge. The door to the holding cell was unlocked in a flash, but Marcus didn't move. He waited, calm and deliberate, as if silently daring them to make another mistake. Outside, the videos recorded by bystanders were already trending online, causing waves of outrage. Ashwood's social media feeds were flooded with hashtags like Justice for Reed and End Racial Profiling. Carson's voice was barely above a whisper. "We're screwed." Hendrix's face darkened, but he couldn't hide the fear creeping into his eyes. How were we supposed to know? Marcus glanced at them, his gaze steady and sharp. He said nothing more as he was escorted out this time with the utmost respect, but the officers weren't ready for what awaited them next. In just 24 hours, Marcus Reed would not be in a defendant's chair. He would be presiding over their case. The next morning, the Ashwood City Courthouse was buzzing. News trucks lined the street as reporters hurried to secure their spots. Protesters held signs demanding accountability, their chants echoing off the courthouse walls. Inside, the tension was palpable as people filled the gallery, their faces a mixture of outrage and curiosity. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Marcus Reed adjusted the black judicial robe draped over his shoulders. He glanced at his reflection in the glass pane, his eyes steady. The weight of what had happened the day before hung in the air. But he knew this wasn't just about him, it was about something much larger. He stepped into the courtroom, and a hush fell over the crowd. Journalists stopped typing mid-sentence. All eyes followed Marcus as he walked to the bench with the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing to prove. Gone was the man in cuffs. He was now the presiding judge, commanding the room with his presence. The officers were already seated at the defendant's table. Miles Hendricks sat rigid, his face pale, his bravado from the day before nowhere to be found. John Carson fidgeted, stealing nervous glances at the crowd and the reporters scribbling notes. Neither man could bring himself to look at Marcus. Marcus sat down and opened the case file before him. He took a moment, allowing the weight of the silence to settle before speaking. "Officers Hendricks and Carson," Marcus began, his voice calm but resolute. "You stand accused of racial profiling, unlawful arrest, and abuse of power. Do you wish to speak in your defense?" Carson cleared his throat, his voice shaky. "We were just following protocol," he stammered. "There was a report, a suspicious vehicle." "Do you have the report in question?" Marcus asked, cutting him off. Carson's mouth opened, but no words came out. Hendricks shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "No, sir," Carson admitted. Marcus's gaze swept the room. "Let the record show that no such report has been presented to support their actions." The courtroom door opened, and Vanessa Lane, a seasoned investigative journalist, entered holding a thick folder. The gallery murmured as she made her way to the witness stand, her presence unexpected, but commanding. "Your Honor, I have evidence relevant to this case," Vanessa said, as she handed the folder to the bailiff. Marcus nodded. "Proceed." Vanessa straightened her blazer and addressed the courtroom. "I've been investigating these officers for months. This," she gestured to the folder, "contains multiple complaints filed against officers Hendricks and Carson for excessive force, illegal searches, and baseless arrests. Most of these cases were quietly dismissed." The gallery erupted in whispers, phones lighting up as texts and tweets flew out into the digital world. Hendricks's face flushed. That's irrelevant," Hendricks blurted out, panic creeping into his voice. Marcus raised his hand, silencing the room. "I'll decide what's relevant." He opened the folder, scanning the pages. His expression remained unreadable, but the fire in his eyes burned steady. Vanessa continued, "This isn't just about yesterday. It's about a pattern of behavior that's gone unchecked for far too long. The courtroom screen flickered on as a video began to play the footage recorded by bystanders during Marcus's arrest. Gasps rippled through the crowd as they watched the officers approach Marcus with their hands hovering near their weapons, heard the thinly veiled threats in their voices. The contrast was stark. Marcus, calm and composed, versus the officers' hostility and aggression. Marcus pressed pause on the video, letting the frozen image linger on the screen. "This is the reality many people face," he said quietly. "But not everyone has the privilege of standing where I do today." He turned back to the officers. "You didn't know who I was when you made that arrest. But that's the point, isn't it? This isn't about one person's status. It's about the assumptions you make based on how someone looks." Hendricks and Carson looked down, unable to meet Marcus's gaze. Vanessa wasn't finished. She stepped forward, her voice firm. "And there's more. I've uncovered that their vehicle database searches were flagged multiple times for suspicious activity targeting minority-owned cars disproportionately." Marcus felt the weight of the room settle around him. His memory flashed back to his own past, the fear, the indignity of being pulled over for no reason as a young law student. He had promised himself then that he would fight for justice, not just for himself, but for anyone who'd been made to feel powerless. He cleared his throat. "Thank you, Ms. Lane, for your testimony." He turned to the jury and the gallery. "The evidence speaks for itself. The question we must now ask is, how do we change a system that allows this to happen?" The room was silent, the air thick with unspoken emotion. The case wasn't just about Hendricks and Carson anymore. It was about something bigger, a reckoning for a system that had failed too many for too long. Marcus looked at the officers once more, his voice steady. "We'll reconvene tomorrow for final statements. This hearing is adjourned." He rose, and the gavel struck the bench. The room erupted again as people exchanged thoughts and recorded final reactions. But Marcus walked away with a quiet resolve. This was far from over. As he stepped outside, the crowd roared his name. Protesters and supporters surged forward, their eyes filled with hope. Marcus paused on the courthouse steps, taking in the scene. A small part of him allowed hope to bloom. But somewhere in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was unraveling, something bigger than just this case. And the real question was, who else had a hand in this? The courtroom emptied slowly, but the whispers of anticipation and outrage lingered like smoke. Marcus Reed remained seated at the bench, staring down at the open case file. His gavel lay still, but in his mind, everything was moving at a relentless pace. He knew the fight had only just begun. In his office, the weight of the case bore down on him as he loosened his tie. The silence was welcome, but his thoughts weren't. The familiar hum of his phone broke through the quiet. He glanced down at the screen, unknown caller. Marcus hesitated before answering. "This is Judge Reed." A familiar voice, low and gravelly, greeted him. "It's Vanessa Lane." Marcus leaned forward, intrigued. "I wasn't expecting a call this soon." Vanessa's voice was steady, but beneath it was an edge of concern. "I thought you should know. I've uncovered something disturbing. It's not just about Hendricks and Carson. There's more." Marcus's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Vanessa's pause was telling. Then, in a measured tone, she said, "There's a list of flagged cases tied to suspicious arrests, far more than I expected, and all of them link back to one person in the precinct." Marcus felt the room narrow in. "Who?" "Lieutenant Alan Graves," Vanessa revealed. The name hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Graves wasn't just any officer, he was a towering figure in the department, known for his influence and ruthlessness. Rumors swirled about him, but no one had ever dared to challenge him directly. Vanessa continued, her voice low. "He's been covering for Hendricks and Carson. This isn't a few rogue arrests, it's a coordinated effort to inflate their stats." And they've been targeting specific communities. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to steady the anger building inside him. Why would Graves risk everything for that? Vanessa's response was swift. Power, promotions, and I think there's something more. The next morning, Marcus returned to the courthouse with a sense of foreboding. The courtroom was packed again, the atmosphere heavier than the day before. As Marcus took his seat, his eyes scanned the room. In the back row, he spotted a familiar figure, Lieutenant Graves himself, arms crossed, his sharp eyes watching everything. The officers, Hendricks and Carson, were back at the defendant's table, but something in their demeanor had shifted. Carson's gaze darted nervously between the gallery and the door, as if considering an escape route. Hendricks, however, sat unnervingly still, his hands clenched in fists. Marcus tapped his gavel lightly. Court is now in session. Before anyone could speak, Carson suddenly stood up, his face pale and sweating. Your Honor, I have something to say, Carson stammered, his voice cracking. The courtroom gasped. Hendricks's eyes widened as he hissed, What the hell are you doing? Carson ignored him. I want to come clean. Marcus leaned forward. Go on? Carson swallowed hard and pointed a shaky finger at Hendricks. It was all Graves. He gave the orders. Hendricks followed them, and I followed Hendricks. We falsified reports because we were told to. They said it was about showing strength, but all we did was destroy people's lives. The gallery exploded in murmurs, cameras flashing wildly. Lieutenant Graves remained stone-faced, but his grip on the edge of the pew tightened. Marcus raised his hand. Order in the court! The room settled once more, though tension buzzed like static. Carson took a deep breath. I don't want to go down protecting them. I was wrong, but I'm done lying. Marcus studied Carson's face. For the first time, he saw genuine remorse. He nodded. Your testimony has been noted. You may step back. Hendricks sprang to his feet, rage twisting his face. He's lying, he shouted, his voice raw. You don't know what you're saying, John. Carson turned to him, his expression almost sad. I know exactly what I'm saying. Marcus's voice cut through the chaos. Enough. The weight of the moment settled like a storm cloud. Marcus's mind raced. If Carson's testimony was true, then the corruption was deeper than anyone had suspected. Graves' presence in the courtroom was no coincidence. Marcus cleared his throat. Given the new information, this court will call Lieutenant Alan Graves to testify. The room fell silent, the air thick with disbelief. Graves slowly rose, his face impassive as he made his way to the witness stand. He took his seat, folding his hands in front of him like a man prepared for battle. Marcus's gaze was unyielding. Lieutenant Graves, you've heard the accusations. Do you have anything to say? Graves leaned in slightly, his expression unreadable. Yes, Your Honor, I do. The gallery leaned forward, breathless, and then Graves smiled a slow, cold smile that sent a chill down Marcus's spine. The courtroom was frozen in tense silence as Lieutenant Alan Graves settled into the witness stand. His calm demeanor was unnerving, a man who knew the weight of his influence and wasn't afraid to wield it. Marcus Reed locked eyes with him, refusing to blink first. You've heard the accusations, Marcus said, his voice steady. Officer Carson claims you gave the orders to falsify reports and target specific individuals. How do you respond? Graves leaned back slightly, his hands folded in his lap. With all due respect, Your Honor, he began smoothly, it's easy to point fingers when you're desperate. The gallery murmured, but Graves ignored them. John Carson is trying to save his own neck. He knows the consequences of his actions, and now he wants to shift the blame. Graves turned slightly, glancing at Carson with a look of controlled disdain. I don't give illegal orders. I run a clean precinct. Marcus studied Graves carefully. Every word was deliberate, wrapped in a calm confidence that could have easily swayed a less experienced judge. But Marcus wasn't easily fooled. "We have records of flagged database searches," Marcus said, flipping through the folder Vanessa Lane had provided. "Searches linked to officers under your command. Minority-owned vehicles were targeted disproportionately. Can you explain that?" Graves's expression didn't falter. "A coincidence," he replied with a shrug. "It's not unusual for repeat offenders to share certain demographics. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality of law enforcement." The room buzzed with unease at the cold dismissal. Marcus felt the knot in his chest tighten. Graves wasn't just defending himself, he was defending a system built on quiet injustices masked as procedure. Vanessa Lane shifted in her seat, her face tight with frustration. Marcus caught her eye and gave a small nod before turning back to Graves. "I find it hard to believe that officers like Carson and Hendricks acted entirely on their own," Marcus said, leaning forward. "Your leadership casts a long shadow, Lieutenant." Graves's lips twitched. "Perhaps, Your Honor, but shadows don't always reflect the truth." The room felt like it was holding its breath. Marcus knew Graves was a master of deflection. If they were going to get to the heart of this, they needed something more a crack in his armor. At that moment, Vanessa Lane rose from her seat. "Your Honor, may I approach the bench?" Marcus gestured her forward, curious. She stepped up and handed him a flash drive. "This contains audio files from a source who wishes to remain anonymous," Vanessa whispered. "But I trust it." Marcus inserted the drive into the courtroom's media console. The screen lit up with a simple audio clip labeled March 17th, 10:42 p.m. Marcus pressed play. A static hiss filled the room before a conversation emerged. "You want the numbers to stay high? Then you hit the neighborhoods where no one will file complaints. You keep the arrests rolling in nothing messy, just enough to make it look clean." The voice was unmistakably Graves's. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Graves's face hardened for the first time, his calm composure slipping. He shifted forward, gripping the edges of the stand. "That's—" Marcus raised a hand. "Lieutenant Graves, you will remain seated." Graves' eyes narrowed, but he obeyed. The recording continued. "If anyone asks, it's all protocol. But you know the game. We make the rules." The clip ended with a sharp click. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus took a deep breath, his voice cutting through the tension. "Lieutenant Graves, do you deny that this is your voice?" Graves's jaw clenched. "That audio is taken out of context." Marcus folded his hands. "Then give us the context." Graves's silence was damning. In the back of the courtroom, Officer Carson lowered his head, as if the weight of the truth had finally come crashing down. Hendricks slumped back in his chair, realizing that the man he had trusted to protect him was now exposed. Marcus stood, his voice calm but firm. "This court will take a recess to review the evidence in full." He struck his gavel against the bench. "We will reconvene in 1 hour." As the courtroom emptied, Marcus remained seated, staring at the blank screen where Graves's words still echoed in his mind. Vanessa approached him, her expression unreadable. "I told you there was more," she said softly. Marcus nodded. "You were right, but something still doesn't sit right with me." Vanessa frowned. "What do you mean?" Marcus glanced at the witness stand where Graves had been sitting moments before. Graves isn't the kind of man who gets caught easily. If there's a recording like that out there, someone wanted him to fall. Vanessa's eyes widened as the implications sank in. Marcus leaned closer, lowering his voice. "We need to find out who's really pulling the strings." Outside the courthouse, the protests had swelled. Chants for justice filled the air, but Marcus knew the truth was still buried deeper than anyone realized. And someone with real power had just made their first move. The courthouse corridors buzzed with tension during the recess. Reporters huddled in tight groups, trading theories as microphones were adjusted for live coverage. Outside, the chants from protesters swelled. their collective voices demanding accountability. But in his office, Marcus Reed sat in silence, staring at the wall as the pieces of the puzzle rearranged themselves in his mind. Vanessa Lane stood nearby, pacing as she processed his last words. "You really think someone set Graves up?" she asked, her brow furrowed. Marcus leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Graves is powerful, but that recording didn't come from nowhere. Someone close enough to know his secrets handed that to you." Vanessa paused. "So you're saying whoever exposed Graves wasn't doing it for justice?" Marcus nodded slowly. "They're playing a bigger game." Just then, the door creaked open, and Chief Deputy Marshal Claire Vaughn stepped in. She was a striking woman, with a sharp presence, her blue-gray eyes scanning the room with the efficiency of someone used to command. "Judge Reed," she greeted, closing the door behind her. "We need to talk." Vanessa's posture stiffened. "About what?" Claire's gaze flicked toward Vanessa. "Privately." Marcus shook his head. "Vanessa stays. This concerns her as much as it concerns me." Claire hesitated, then nodded. "Fair enough, but this isn't for the press." Vanessa folded her arms. "I'm here as an investigator, not a reporter." Claire took a deep breath and placed a slim folder on Marcus's desk. "We've been investigating Graves for over a year," she began. "We knew he was dirty, but we didn't have enough to take him down. That recording changes everything." Marcus opened the folder and scanned its contents: financial statements, unexplained wire transfers, and reports of coerced witnesses who had disappeared. Claire's voice softened. "The problem is, if Graves falls, others could rise. He's dangerous, but the people above him are worse." Vanessa leaned in. "Who exactly are we talking about?" Claire's eyes darkened. "There's a council of power brokers officials, business leaders, even a few judges. They've been shielding Graves because he kept their numbers high and the public distracted." Marcus felt a chill run through him. So when someone leaked that recording, they weren't just turning on Graves. They were shifting the balance. Claire nodded. "Exactly. And there's one name that keeps surfacing: Senator Douglas Sharp." The room went still. Marcus knew that name well, a man with deep connections in both law enforcement and politics, someone untouchable to most. Vanessa exhaled sharply. "If Sharp's involved, this is bigger than we thought." Marcus closed the folder, his jaw tight. "He's known for his tough-on-crime policies. It's all starting to make sense. Graves was his enforcer." Claire's expression was grim. "But Sharp's smart. He wouldn't have let that recording slip unless he needed Graves out of the way." Marcus's mind raced. "So the question is, what's he planning now that Graves is exposed?" The courtroom reconvened, the gallery now more crowded than ever. Graves was back at the defendant's table, his face a mask of controlled fury. He knew his career hung by a thread, but Marcus could see something else behind his eyes' betrayal. "Lieutenant Graves," Marcus began, "before this court rules on the admissibility of the recording, I need you to clarify something." Graves's gaze was cold. "Clarify what, Your Honor?" Marcus leaned forward. "Who knew about your operations? Who stood to gain from your silence and from your downfall?" Graves's jaw tensed, his mind visibly calculating the cost of his next words. Finally, he exhaled slowly. "There's only one person who gave the green light," he said, his voice low but clear. "Senator Sharp." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Marcus's gavel struck down sharply. "Order!" Graves's face twisted into a bitter smile. "You think I ran this alone? I was a soldier. Sharp wanted results, and I delivered." Marcus's pulse pounded in his ears. Graves had confirmed what he feared, but what was Sharp's endgame? Graves leaned closer, his voice almost a whisper. "But you already knew that, didn't you, Judge? The question is, what are you going to do about it?" The recess ended with tension so thick it was suffocating. Marcus called the session to a close for the day. but the aftershock of Graves' revelation lingered. As Marcus stepped outside the courthouse, the crowd's cheers turned into questions. Reporters bombarded him with demands for answers. Vanessa caught up to him. "You heard what Graves said? This leads straight to Sharp." Marcus's face was set in stone. "We need more than accusations if we're going after someone like him." Vanessa nodded. "Then let's get to work." Claire Vaughn joined them as they reached the steps. "If you're serious about this, you need to be ready. Sharp doesn't play by the rules." Marcus's eyes burned with quiet resolve. "Neither do I, when justice is at stake." The sun was setting behind the courthouse, casting long shadows across Ashwood City as Marcus Reed made his way home. The weight of what had been revealed in court pressed on his shoulders like a lead mantle. Senator Douglas Sharp. The name carried the force of a storm, a man with the power to make or break anyone who opposed him. Vanessa Lane followed closely behind Marcus, her notebook tucked under her arm. Chief Deputy Marshal Claire Vaughn walked a few paces behind, scanning the street for any sign of trouble. "We need to talk somewhere private," Claire said as she glanced over her shoulder. "Sharp's not the type to let accusations go unanswered." Marcus nodded. "Agreed. My house is secure." The drive was silent, each of them lost in thought. When they arrived at Marcus's modest but well-kept home, he disabled the security system with a quick code. Vanessa set her things down on the dining table, and Claire took position near the window, her gaze sharp. Marcus poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. Sharp wanted Graves gone. But why now? Vanessa opened her laptop, pulling up a list of recent political headlines. "Sharp's been pushing for a massive public safety bill. It gives his office even more oversight over law enforcement and cuts judicial independence." Marcus frowned. "Of course. With Graves out of the way, there's no one to tie him to the corruption. He gets to play the reformer." Claire turned to face them, her expression grim. "If that bill passes, Sharp will control not just law enforcement, but how the courts oversee it." Vanessa's fingers hovered over the keys. "We can't let that happen, but exposing him, that's not going to be easy." Marcus rubbed his temples. "It's worse than that. If Sharp realizes we're on to him, he'll move faster. He'll burn anyone who could testify." Claire's phone buzzed. She picked it up, her face darkening as she read the text. "We might already be too late." Marcus straightened. "What happened?" Claire's voice was tight. "There was an accident. The officer scheduled to testify tomorrow, Carson, was run off the road. He's alive, but he's in the hospital under heavy guard." Vanessa's jaw tightened. Accident? Or a warning? Marcus didn't need to answer. They all knew. The next morning, Marcus visited the hospital. Officer John Carson lay in bed, his face bruised, his arm in a sling. His eyes flickered open as Marcus pulled a chair beside him. "You shouldn't be here, Judge," Carson rasped. "They're watching." "I don't care," Marcus replied. "We're not going to let this get buried." Carson's eyes filled with fear. "It's bigger than you think. Sharp's not just cleaning house, he's preparing for something. Graves knew too much. And I was disposable." Marcus leaned closer. "You're not disposable. You can still help." Carson hesitated, his breath shallow. "There's one more thing. A ledger. Graves kept records, names, dates, all of it." Marcus's heart quickened. "Where is it?" Carson's eyes flickered toward the doorway, then back to Marcus. "In a storage unit outside the city, Unit 57. But if they find it before you—" Marcus squeezed Carson's hand. "We'll get to it first. Stay strong." Carson nodded weakly before closing his eyes. As Marcus stepped out into the hallway, Vanessa and Claire were waiting. "We have a location," Marcus said, his voice firm. "Graves kept a ledger. If we find it, we can prove Sharp's involvement." Claire's face was set. "I'll call for backup." Marcus shook his head. "No official channels. If this gets out, Sharp will bury it." Vanessa grabbed her bag. Then we're doing this ourselves. The storage facility was tucked off a quiet service road, surrounded by tall pine trees. The evening sky had darkened, casting shadows that stretched across the lot. Claire pulled the SUV to a stop, and they stepped out, their breaths visible in the cold air. Marcus glanced at the rows of metal doors. Unit 57. They moved cautiously, Claire leading the way with her hand near her concealed firearm. The facility was eerily quiet. They reached the unit, and Marcus inserted the key Carson had provided. The lock clicked, and the metal door creaked as it rolled open. Inside, the air was stale. Stacks of old boxes lined the walls, but in the center was a small metal safe. Vanessa knelt beside it, pulling out a set of lockpicks from her bag. "I've covered enough crime stories to learn a few things," she said with a smirk, before focusing on the safe's lock. Claire watched the entrance while Marcus checked the boxes. "Anything?" he asked. Vanessa's hand turned the pick carefully. After a tense moment, the lock clicked open. "Got it." Inside the safe was a thick black ledger bound in leather. Marcus lifted it carefully, flipping it open. Names, dates, financial transactions, it was all there. Every bribe, every cover-up, every name connected to Sharp's operations. "We've got him," Marcus whispered. Before they could celebrate, the distant sound of tires on gravel reached their ears. Claire turned sharply. "We've got company." Vanessa closed the safe and stuffed the ledger into her bag. Marcus nodded. "Let's move." They hurried out of the unit and sprinted toward the SUV. Headlights appeared at the far end of the lot, two black sedans. Claire yanked open the driver's door. "Get in!" The engine roared to life as she slammed the accelerator, the SUV fishtailing as it sped down the exit lane. The sedans gave chase, their lights bouncing off the surrounding trees. "Hold on!" Claire shouted as she veered onto the main road. Marcus clutched the seat as the SUV swerved. Vanessa gritted her teeth, holding the bag close. The ledger was their key to everything, but only if they survived long enough to use it. The SUV barreled down the narrow, tree-lined road, its tires skidding on the loose gravel as Claire Vaughn gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled precision. Behind them, the two black sedans accelerated, their headlights cutting through the dark like hunting spotlights. "Hold on!" Claire shouted as she slammed the accelerator. The engine roared in response, but the sedans stayed close, their engines growling like predators. Marcus Reed leaned forward, steadying himself against the dashboard. "They're gaining!" Vanessa Lane clutched the bag with the ledger tightly against her chest, her heart pounding. She glanced over her shoulder at the approaching vehicles. "We can't outrun them for long." Claire's jaw tightened. "We don't need to. We just need to outsmart them." Ahead, the road split. One path led to the main highway. The other twisted into the dense forest. Claire made a split-second decision and veered left onto the forest road. The SUV bounced violently as it hit the uneven terrain, but Claire kept control, navigating between towering pine trees. The first sedan followed, its tires spraying gravel, but the second car hesitated at the turn. Vanessa exhaled sharply. One down. One more to go. The remaining sedan stayed relentless, its headlights flashing erratically as it weaved through the trees behind them. Marcus watched the car's movements carefully. "They're not just chasing us. They're trying to force us into a mistake." Claire's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. "Then let's give them one." She spotted a sharp curve ahead where the road dipped into a steep ravine. As they neared the edge, Claire jerked the wheel hard to the right, sending the SUV skidding dangerously close to the drop. The pursuing sedan didn't have time to adjust. Its front tires clipped the edge of the ravine, sending the vehicle into a violent spin. The driver overcorrected, but it was too late. The sedan flipped sideways and tumbled into the darkness below with a deafening crash. Claire straightened the wheel and pressed forward. The forest road finally gave way to the main highway. "We're clear," Claire said, though her voice remained tense. Vanessa exhaled, her grip on the bag loosening slightly. That was too close. Marcus sat back, his pulse still racing. They're not going to stop. We've forced their hand now. Minutes later, they pulled into an empty rest stop off the highway. The night air was cold and sharp, but they needed a moment to regroup. Claire kept the engine running, her eyes scanning the road for any signs of pursuit. Vanessa opened the bag and pulled out the ledger, placing it carefully on the hood of the SUV. Marcus flipped through the pages, his breath catching as the scope of Sharp's network became painfully clear. This is everything, Marcus whispered. Judges, police officials, business leaders, all of them tied to Sharp, payments, meetings. It's all here. Vanessa's face hardened. It's enough to bring the entire operation down. Claire crossed her arms, her gaze sharp. But it's also a death sentence if we don't handle this right. Marcus nodded grimly. We can't trust anyone inside the system, not yet. He turned to Vanessa. What media outlets can we trust with this? Vanessa hesitated. A few, but Sharp's reach is long. If we go public too soon, he'll spin it as a smear campaign. Claire stepped forward. Then we don't go public just yet. We need leverage. Marcus closed the ledger, his mind already working through their next steps. We'll need witnesses, people who can corroborate what's in here. Vanessa's face fell slightly. Carson's the only one who's agreed to talk, and after what happened to him, the others will be too scared to come forward. Marcus's jaw tightened. Then we'll protect them, one by one. Claire's phone buzzed again. She checked the screen and cursed under her breath. You're not going to believe this. Vanessa leaned in. What? Claire handed Marcus the phone, showing a live news feed. The headline sent a cold chill down his spine. Breaking. Senator Douglas Sharp calls for emergency hearing on judicial corruption. The screen showed Sharp standing at a podium, his silver hair immaculately combed, his expression somber, yet resolute. Cameras flashed as he spoke with calculated calm. This is a dark day for our city, Sharp began. We've discovered disturbing evidence of misconduct at the highest levels of our judiciary. I'm calling for an immediate investigation into Ashwood's judicial offices. Marcus's hand tightened around the phone. He's framing this to make me the villain. Vanessa shook her head in disbelief. He's flipping the narrative, accusing the courts of corruption, while positioning himself as the hero. Claire's eyes narrowed. He's fast, too fast. He had this planned the moment Graves cracked. Marcus's mind was racing. He's trying to preempt us. If we don't move now, he'll lock everything down. We need to make our next move and fast. Vanessa nodded. Then we expose him before he can tighten his grip. Claire started the SUV again. Then let's go. There's one more person who might be willing to testify. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Who? Claire glanced at him as she pulled back onto the road. Graves. The silence that followed was heavy. Marcus exchanged a look with Vanessa, who seemed equally stunned. You think he'll talk? Marcus asked. Claire's grip on the wheel tightened. He might if we can convince him, and if we get to him before Sharp does. Marcus nodded slowly. Then we find Graves. Before this war becomes unwinnable. The SUV sped down the highway under the cover of night, headlights cutting through the fog rolling in from the hills. Marcus Reed sat in the passenger seat, staring at the blurred lights passing by. Vanessa Lane was in the back seat, typing furiously on her laptop, cross-referencing information from the ledger. Claire Vaughan's hands were steady on the wheel as she weaved through the sparse traffic, her jaw set in determination. We're sure Graves hasn't been taken in yet? Marcus asked, breaking the tense silence. Claire nodded. I've got a contact watching the precinct. He wasn't there when the news broke about Sharp's statement. If he's smart, he's already in hiding. Vanessa looked up from her screen. But Graves doesn't strike me as the type to run without a plan. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. He's not. Which means if we don't find him first, Sharp will. Marcus's mind raced. Graves held the key to proving Sharp's conspiracy. If they could convince him to testify, the entire house of cards would collapse. But Graves wasn't someone who folded easily, and Marcus knew it. They pulled into a desolate parking lot outside a crumbling, abandoned motel on the edge of town. The neon sign buzzed faintly, casting a pale red glow that barely lit the gravel lot. "This is where your contact last saw him?" Marcus asked as he stepped out of the SUV, the cold night air biting at his skin. Claire nodded. "If Graves is here, he'll be on edge. Let me do the talking." Vanessa pulled her coat tighter. "He's not exactly the most welcoming guy. What if he refuses to help?" Marcus met her gaze, his eyes steady. "Then we make him realize he doesn't have a choice." The trio approached one of the darkened rooms, its curtains drawn tight. Claire rapped her knuckles against the weathered door. "Graves, it's Claire Vaughn," she called out. "We need to talk." For a long moment there was no sound, then the faint scrape of a lock turning. The door opened a crack, and Lieutenant Alan Graves's face appeared in the shadows. His eyes were bloodshot, his expression guarded. "You've got guts coming here," Graves muttered, stepping back to let them inside. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp on a battered nightstand. Maps and papers were scattered across the small table, Graves's attempt to piece together an escape plan. A half-full bottle of whiskey sat nearby. Marcus scanned the room. "You're running out of places to hide." Graves snorted and sat heavily on the worn bed. "Don't I know it?" He eyed them warily. "Let me guess you're here to offer me salvation in exchange for my testimony?" Claire crossed her arms. "We're offering you survival. Sharp's already moving to clean up loose ends. You're next." Graves' bitter smile didn't reach his eyes. "Sharp won't kill me. He's not stupid enough to leave that kind of trail." Vanessa stepped forward, holding up the ledger. "Maybe not directly, but after this, you'll disappear one way or another. And you know it." Graves's eyes locked on the leather-bound book. Recognition flickered in his gaze, followed by something else, fear. "That ledger," Graves exhaled sharply. "How did you get it?" "Carson," Marcus said. "He trusted us to finish this." Graves rubbed his face, weariness written in every line. "You're playing with fire. Sharp's not just some crooked politician. He's built an empire of silence and fear." Marcus stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "Empires fall when people stop being afraid." Graves looked up, his defenses cracking. "You don't get it, Judge. I wasn't just following orders, I helped build that system. I was Sharp's right hand. If I talk, it won't just ruin me. It'll ruin everything I ever stood for." "That's the point," Marcus said. "If you stay silent, you'll be remembered as a coward who let Sharp destroy everything. But if you speak up, you might just be the one who finally brings him down." Graves's eyes flickered with conflict. He reached for the whiskey but stopped short, his hand trembling. Finally, he exhaled and nodded. "I'll testify," he said quietly. "But I'm going to need protection." Claire stepped forward. "We've got you covered. But we need to move fast. Sharp will send someone if he hasn't already." As if on cue, the unmistakable sound of tires crunching over gravel reached their ears. Graves's head snapped toward the window. "Damn it, they're here!" Vanessa pulled the curtains back just enough to peek outside. Black SUVs, 3 of them. Claire pulled out her sidearm, her voice calm. "Sharp's goons." Marcus clenched his fists. "We can't fight them head on." Graves stood, his expression resolute. "There's a back exit. Leads to the alley behind the motel." Claire nodded. "Then let's move." The hallway was dark and narrow as they moved toward the rear exit. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the front entrance. Sharp's men had arrived. Claire motioned for everyone to stay quiet as she eased the back door open. A cold rush of air hit them as they slipped outside. The alley was dimly lit, but the way out was clear. Suddenly, a shout rang out behind them. "There they are!" Claire spun, aiming her weapon. "Run!" Marcus grabbed Graves by the arm, pulling him forward as gunfire erupted. The bullets struck the brick wall behind them, sending shards of stone flying. Vanessa ducked low, clutching the ledger as they sprinted toward the street. Claire returned fire, taking cover behind a dumpster. One of Sharp's men fell, but the others pressed forward. "We need a vehicle!" Vanessa shouted. Graves pointed toward a parked delivery van at the end of the alley. "There!" Marcus yanked the door open, and Claire fired another shot before sprinting toward them. They piled into the van, and Marcus slammed the gas. The tires screeched as the van lurched forward, narrowly avoiding the pursuing SUVs. Claire reloaded her weapon, her eyes scanning for threats. Vanessa's voice was breathless but steady. "We got him. Now we need to get him to safety." Graves stared ahead, his jaw clenched. "You better hope you know what you're doing, Judge. Once this starts, there's no going back." Marcus's gaze was fixed on the road ahead, his voice resolute. "Good. I'm not looking back." The delivery van sped down the deserted streets, its headlights cutting through the early dawn haze. The tension inside was suffocating, every bump in the road amplifying the silence. Marcus Reed gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white as he maneuvered through side streets to avoid being followed. Claire Vaughn, sitting in the passenger seat, scanned their surroundings with sharp eyes. Her weapon rested on her lap, ready for action. In the back, Vanessa Lane hunched over her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys as she accessed secure communication channels. Beside her, Alan Graves sat slumped, his face a mixture of exhaustion and resignation. "We need a safe house," Claire said, breaking the silence. "If Sharp knows we have Graves, every asset he has will be hunting us." Vanessa nodded without looking up. "I've got a lead. There's an old community center outside the city. It's been closed for years, but the power and water are still connected." "It's isolated enough to buy us time," Graves snorted. "Buying time won't stop Sharp. He'll just send more men." Marcus glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Then we use that time to prepare. Once your testimony is secured, Sharp's empire falls." Graves shook his head. "You're still thinking too small. Sharp's not just a man, he's an idea. He's built this system to outlive him." Marcus's jaw tightened. "And every idea collapses when its foundation crumbles. That's what your testimony will do." Graves fell silent, his expression unreadable. The sun was beginning to rise when they reached the community center. The once thriving building was now a shadow of its former self, with faded paint peeling from the walls and overgrown weeds choking the walkway. Marcus parked the van behind the building, out of sight from the main road. They entered cautiously, clearing each room to ensure it was empty. Claire secured the perimeter, while Vanessa set up her equipment on a rickety table in the main hall. Marcus helped Graves settle into a corner, offering him a bottle of water. "This isn't exactly a five-star hideout," Graves muttered, twisting the cap off. "Consider it temporary," Marcus replied. "Once we've recorded your statement, we'll move you somewhere more secure." Vanessa powered up her laptop and connected an external microphone. "All right, Graves, let's get your testimony on record." Graves hesitated, his eyes darting to the boarded-up windows. "If I do this, Sharp won't just come after me. He'll come after everyone I care about. My family, my friends." Claire walked in, her voice firm. "You think staying silent will protect them? Sharp doesn't leave loose ends. The only way to keep them safe is to end this now." Graves sighed heavily, then nodded. "Fine, let's do it." Vanessa hit record, and Graves began to speak. He detailed everything: the orders he received, the meetings with Sharp, the ledger's coded transactions. His voice was steady, but the weight of his words filled the room. Names were named, dates provided, and Sharp's intricate web of corruption began to unravel piece by piece. When he finished, Vanessa saved the recording to multiple drives, encrypting each one. She handed one to Marcus and another to Claire. "Even if they find us, they won't be able to destroy all of it," she said. The calm didn't last long. As they were securing the last of their belongings, Claire's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face darkening. "They found us," she said, her voice cold. Outside, the distant hum of engines grew louder. Marcus peeked through a crack in the boarded window and spotted 3 SUVs pulling up to the edge of the property. Men in dark tactical gear spilled out, moving with practiced precision. "They're not wasting time," Marcus muttered. Claire checked her weapon. "They'll come in fast. We need to slow them down." Vanessa unplugged her equipment, stuffing it into her bag. "I'll protect the drives. Whatever happens, we can't lose them." Marcus turned to Graves. "Can you handle a gun?" Graves hesitated, then nodded. "I'm rusty, but I'll manage." Marcus handed him a pistol. "Stay close to Vanessa. Claire and I will buy you time." The first wave of attackers breached the front door, their boots echoing against the wooden floor. Marcus and Claire were ready, taking cover behind overturned tables. The firefight erupted in a chaotic symphony of shouts and gunfire. Claire's aim was sharp, dropping the first 2 intruders with precise shots. Marcus covered her, firing at the advancing line to keep them pinned. In the back room, Vanessa clutched the encrypted drives tightly as Graves stood guard. "They're not going to stop," Graves muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. Vanessa's voice was steady despite the chaos. "They don't have to. We just need to hold out long enough to get this out." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the building. One of Sharp's men had broken through a side window, cutting off their escape route. Graves fired instinctively, his shot grazing the man's arm. "Move!" Vanessa shouted, pulling Graves toward the rear exit. In the main hall, Marcus reloaded his weapon, the tension mounting. "We can't hold them off forever." Claire glanced at him, her face grim. "We just need to give them enough time to get out." Marcus nodded, firing another round before falling back. "Let's go. We'll regroup outside." They retreated through the side door, meeting Vanessa and Graves in the overgrown lot behind the building. "Did you get out clean?" Marcus asked. Vanessa nodded. "Drives are intact." Claire scanned the tree line. "We need to split up. They'll follow the van if they see us all together." Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Claire and I will draw them away." "Vanessa, you and Graves get those drives to a safe location." Vanessa didn't argue. She grabbed Graves by the arm and disappeared into the woods as Marcus and Claire climbed back into the van. As the engine roared to life, Marcus glanced at Claire. "Let's give them something to chase." Claire smirked, shifting into gear. "Let's make it count." The van roared down the narrow dirt road, kicking up a thick cloud of dust behind it. Marcus gripped the dashboard as Claire Vaughn expertly navigated the rough terrain, her foot pressing hard on the gas. Behind them, the black SUVs from Sharp's team appeared, their headlights bouncing wildly as they pursued. "We've got their attention," Claire muttered, her knuckles tight around the wheel. Marcus glanced over his shoulder. "They're gaining," Claire smirked faintly. "Good. Let them." In the woods, Vanessa Lane and Alan Graves moved quickly, ducking under branches and skirting fallen logs as they made their way toward the highway. Vanessa carried the bag with the encrypted drives strapped tightly to her back, her eyes darting to every shadow. Graves was breathing heavily, his legs stumbling over uneven ground. "I'm not cut out for this," he muttered between gasps. Vanessa reached back, grabbing his arm and steadying him. "You don't have to be. You just need to keep moving." They broke through the tree line and onto the shoulder of a quiet highway. Vanessa spotted a pair of headlights in the distance. She stepped into the road, waving her arms frantically. The car slowed a beat-up pickup truck driven by an older man with kind eyes. He rolled down the window, frowning in concern. "Y'all okay?" Vanessa nodded quickly. "We need a ride. It's urgent." The man hesitated, then unlocked the doors. "Hop in." Vanessa and Graves climbed into the truck bed, ducking low as it pulled onto the highway. Graves glanced at her. "You think they'll make it?" Vanessa's face was resolute. "They'll hold them off, but we need to make sure this gets out, no matter what." Back on the dirt road, the first SUV closed in on the van, its front bumper nearly clipping the rear. Claire slammed on the brakes, causing the pursuing vehicle to swerve violently. Marcus rolled down the window, aiming his pistol at the SUV's tires. With two steady shots, he blew out the front tires, sending the vehicle skidding into a ditch. "Nice shot," Claire said, gunning the engine again. The second SUV overtook its disabled partner, its occupants firing at the van. Bullets tore through the rear windows, but Claire held steady, weaving to make them harder to hit. "We can't keep this up," Marcus shouted, reloading. Claire's eyes flicked to a turn ahead. "We don't have to." She swerved sharply, taking the van off the road and into an open field. The sudden maneuver caught their pursuers off guard, forcing the second SUV to follow. Claire aimed for a dense grove of trees at the far end of the field. "Hold on!" The van burst into the trees, scraping against branches as it plowed forward. The pursuing SUV wasn't as lucky. It struck a thick trunk head-on, the impact sending it spinning to a halt. Claire skidded the van to a stop in a small clearing. She and Marcus jumped out, taking cover behind the vehicle as they caught their breath. "That's two down," Marcus said, wiping sweat from his brow. Claire nodded, her gun at the ready. But Sharp won't stop until he gets what he wants. Meanwhile, Vanessa and Graves reached a small roadside diner. The truck driver let them out, offering a wave before driving off. Inside, Vanessa connected her laptop to the diner's spotty Wi-Fi. She uploaded the encrypted drives to multiple secure servers, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Graves stood by the window, watching nervously. "You think they'll come here?" Vanessa didn't look up. "If we don't move fast, they won't have to." The upload bar inched forward, painfully slowly. 82%. 83%. Outside, a sleek black car pulled into the lot. Graves froze. "We've got company." Vanessa clenched her jaw, willing the upload to go faster. 92%. 93%. The car doors opened, and two men stepped out, scanning the diner. "Stay behind me," Graves said, raising his pistol. The upload hit 100% just as the men entered. Vanessa yanked the power cord from the laptop and stuffed it into her bag. "Let's go." The two of them darted out the back door, disappearing into the woods as the men gave chase. At the same time, Marcus and Claire regrouped at an old service station on the outskirts of the city. Claire's phone buzzed with a notification. She checked it and smiled grimly. Vanessa got the files out. They're safe. Marcus exhaled deeply, relief washing over him. "Then it's over." Claire shook her head. "Not yet. Sharp won't go down without a fight. We need to get back to the courthouse and force the system to act." Marcus's expression hardened. "Then let's finish this." The courthouse was packed with reporters and protesters when Marcus, Claire, Vanessa, and Graves arrived. Sharp's emergency hearing had backfired spectacularly, as Vanessa's files were leaked to the media, exposing his corruption in full detail. Sharp sat at the defendant's table, his face pale but defiant. Marcus took the bench, his voice ringing with quiet authority. "Senator Sharp, the evidence before this court paints a clear picture of your actions' abuse of power, bribery, and conspiracy to undermine justice." Sharp smirked. "This is a circus, Judge. You have no proof." Vanessa stood, holding up her laptop. "We have everything, and the world has already seen it." Sharp's smirk faltered as the murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. Graves stepped forward, his voice steady. "And I'm here to testify. You wanted loyalty, Sharp. This is where it got you." The courtroom erupted as Marcus struck his gavel. "Order!" The wheels of justice were finally turning, and Sharp's empire was crumbling beneath him. Outside the courthouse, Marcus stood on the steps, watching as Sharp was led away in handcuffs. The crowd cheered, their voices a testament to the power of persistence and truth. Vanessa joined him, her face glowing with satisfaction. "Think this will stick?" Marcus nodded. "It will." This time, justice won't bend. Graves emerged from the building, his expression lighter than before. "You did it, Judge." Marcus shook his head. "We did it. Together." The fight wasn't over. There was still work to be done. But for the first time, Marcus felt hope. As the sun set over Ashwood City, the wheels of justice continued to turn, driven by those who refused to back down. Marcus Reed, Vanessa Lane, Claire Vaughn, and even Alan Graves proved that no empire of corruption is unbreakable when courage and truth come together. This is just one story of resilience and accountability, but the fight for justice is ongoing, and we all have a role to play in making the world a better place. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more gripping narratives like this, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more tales of courage, mystery, and redemption. Stay tuned for our next story, and thank you for watching.